Today's conversation is sponsored by First Generation Capital Partners. If you're an accredited investor and you want to know about how we're helping other accredited investors keep more of their income, go to firstgencp.com/going long.
I was discovering, hey, this isn't rocket science. This isn't something that is so far out there that I need to spend years and years studying it or, takes a skill set that I don't have. This is really, block and tackle running a business. And I think I can do this.
You're listening to the Going Long podcast with Billy Keels, the #1 podcast for long-distance real asset investing.
Welcome to the Going Long podcast. We're back once again to continue to help to educate you so you feel much more comfortable as well as confident investing beyond your backyard. And yes, I am your host, Billy Keels, and I'm happy to welcome you back to another amazing conversation. So this one you're really going to get loads and loads out of, especially if you're somebody who's been in the IT industry, you're still in the IT industry, and you're looking to have really hard assets work for you. Like, this is a conversation you're really going to want to listen to. So let me get through this really quickly, and then we get into the conversation. So here's the thing. We continue to move up the charts together. Thank you so very much for that. Really want to thank those of you, especially that have taken the time to leave an honest written review as well as a rating. And if you have not had a chance to do that, I invite you to do that. Leave us a nice, honest written review as well as rating. Let us know what you'd like to see changed. I know you're seeing lots of changes because we're taking your feedback on right now, which is fantastic. And also too, you can find the new home for every single podcast episode ever by going to firstgencp.com/podcast, and you can find every single one of the episodes there for you. The audio, the video, the transcripts, it's all there. And then, you know what? Today's conversation is going to be a really great one. Got an ex-IT professional. I guess, it sounds good to say ex-IT professional. Ex-IT professional who's also a business owner, who's found a real passion in investing in hard assets, learned a lot as a limited partner, now today is a successful general partner, and is helping other people. You're going to get loads and loads out of this conversation that we're going to have with today's guest, who is Mr. Joel Fine, and we'll get to that just after this. Are you a busy, high-paid professional? Someone that in the previous 2 years has earned $200,000 and is expected to earn $200,000 this year? Or maybe if you filed jointly, previously you've earned $300,000 the previous 2 years and you're also expected to do that this year. Or maybe if not, either individually or jointly, you have $1 million in net worth, not including your primary residence. If you meet any of these criteria, then you're someone that the IRS considers to be an accredited investor. That probably means you're someone like an enterprise software sales executive. You may be an executive in a major corporation. You may be a doctor. You may be a lawyer, maybe a high-paid consultant. You may even work for a major sports franchise. The thing I know you have in common is that you continue to do the hard work. Like, you're doing 100% of the work and you're only bringing home 50% of the reward because you continue to get crushed by your income taxes. If you are tired of this situation and you're looking for a new solution, then go to firstgencp.com/going long. When you get there, that's going to help you to start the journey so that you can begin to take back control of your taxes, take control of your time. And then also that means you're going to be able to spend more of the time that you want with the people that you love the most. And that is the way that you're going to get the personal freedom that you're looking for. So if you're looking to take back control, go ahead and go to firstgencp.com/going long and see how we can help you today. So, you know what? If you want to understand how to go from developing software to developing residential communities in your long distance investing journey, then guess what? Today's the conversation that you're going to want to listen to until the very last word. You know why? Because today's guest, well, not only is a former development engineer, I think he's a certain type of development engineer. I'm sure he's going to tell us a little bit more about that. He also spent over 20 years in the IT space. Kind of like me, I did that too. And then you know what? He jumped into business ownership in the automotive industry. Really want to hear about this. And then he also decided he wanted to go back to the IT industry for a few years. But since then, he is now a real estate developer. He's a syndicator as well as an investor. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to today's conversation the founder of Lakeline Properties, Mr. Joel Fine. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Billy. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm excited.
Joel, that makes two of us, my friend. That makes two of us. And I know the entire Going Long family is looking forward to another amazing conversation. They're going to learn so much from you. And you know what? They're going to learn at least in 5 questions, because I'm going to ask you 2 in the beginning. I'm going to ask you 3 at the very end. And then the reality is, Joel, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions in the middle. I just don't know what those questions are yet. So if you're okay, I'd like for us to go ahead and get into the conversation.
Let's do it. Let's see where it takes us.
All right. Let's see where it takes us. So very first question I have for you, Joel, is help us understand where you live in the U.S.
So I'm based in Austin, Texas. Moved here 2 years ago from California. I lived in Silicon Valley, worked in Silicon Valley. As you mentioned, I was in the IT space for many years. But 2 years ago, decided to pack up and head out. And now we live in Austin.
All right. Sounds great. And it's for some strange reason for the last 2 years, it seems like a lot of people in California moved to Texas. Maybe you're going to have to tell us about what's in the water out there in Texas for some of that reason, but don't tell me yet. Just hang on a second. Because I really want to know, what is the most positive thing that's happened to you in the last 24 hours? That's question number 2, by the way.
Let's see. So I'm in the process of buying a single family residence in Portland, Oregon. It's partly an investment, but partly for my kids. I've got 2 kids living in Portland, and so I'm going to rent it to them. And so in that purchase process, we just received the clear to close, and I've got a notary coming to my house in about an hour. We'll sign off and hopefully we'll close that transaction.
Fantastic. You know what? And being able to do that and purchase an asset and be able to walk through that with family, I think is something that we can all learn a little bit something from. So appreciate you sharing that positive note and also helping us understand you went from California to Texas. And here's the thing, Joel, I know we just kind of are meeting one another, but people know me as someone who tends to try to keep the bar like extremely high, sometimes so high that I give myself these really impossible tasks, like trying to tell your entire backstory when I'm introducing you in like 2.5 seconds. That's never, ever going to happen. You've had way too much positive impact on others. You've done too many things, but I have to try. Like, this is just one of the things I give myself, these impossible tasks. So right where we're getting to know one another, I'm already going to ask you for a favor. And the first favor is, can you help me out and actually tell your own backstory in your own words? And you can tell it as long as you want. You don't have 2.5 seconds. You tell about the things that you think are important for us to know, number one. And I am going to ask you one other thing, though. If you could help us and talk about some of the major decisions that you've also made along the way, because that was really going to help us to set the story. And then we'll see where you and I take the conversation from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess I can go all the way back to college. In college, I studied to be an engineer. Kind of had that expectation of, hey, I'll be a W-2 employee all my life. I'll, save a little bit here and there, and save up enough over a however many year career so that at some point I can retire and live on the beach. And so after college, I went to work as an engineer again in Silicon Valley. Lived right around San Jose for a long time. Just from just out of college until very recently, till a couple of years ago. Worked as an engineer for a while, then got promoted a couple of times to project manager, and then I moved into the program management space, which is not quite engineering. It's very closely aligned with engineering, but it's more connecting the engineering teams with other folks like product management, manufacturing, marketing, and so forth. To organize the team that's going to deliver new products. So spent some time in that capacity, ran program management teams, did a little diversion into the automotive industry, automotive repair on the retail side. You mentioned that. Spent about 5 years owning and running a business, doing tune-ups and oil changes and the like. Kind of scratched my entrepreneurial itch. But that didn't go all that well. So I went back into high tech, back into program management. About 5 or 6 years ago, started doing real estate as a side gig. Bought a single family house in the Austin area while I was living in California. That was kind of an accidental journey into real estate in the sense that the intent with that property was really just as a way for my wife and me to plant a flag in Texas. We knew that at some point we wanted to move to Texas from California, but we didn't know when we would be able to do that. We knew it was a few years away because we still had kids at home in high school and wanted to kind of, get them settled and get them launched before we made any big moves. So we said, okay, we'll buy a place in Austin and use that. We can either move there or, if things go crazy in the real estate side, either here or there, we can sell it and use that to leverage up into something that we really want. So bought that, started learning about real estate as an investment. And really that was sort of my gateway drug, was that first single family residence that I bought. Realized for the first time that, it's the benefits of real estate between the cash flow and the appreciation and the tax benefits and so forth. So from there, I started buying more stuff, bought in a different market, went to Ohio and bought a bunch of things in Cleveland, to duplexes and triplexes. In parallel with that, I was learning about the syndication model, the model of organizing teams of partners to buy bigger assets, and realized that was probably a good way to scale up, a more effective and more efficient way to scale up than buying duplexes and triplexes along the way. So started investing in syndications, at first passively. I think I invested in probably 15 or 16 syndications as a passive investor, investing in mostly multifamily, but a few other things like senior living, and I think a biomedical research facility that was being built, and I don't know, a handful of other assets in different states, mostly Texas, but Ohio, Massachusetts. And then after I'd done a few of those, I learned what I could from the guys who were running the deals. I was a passive, but said, hey, I think I can do this myself. I was reading books and listening to podcasts and going to meetups and talking to everybody I could to learn what I needed to about the syndication business model and about the commercial real estate industry. Eventually moved into the sponsorship side. So in the last couple of years, I've done, I think, 6 deals as a sponsor in the multifamily value add space, about 1,100 doors total. Then subsequent to doing some of those deals, I partnered up with some folks who were doing subdivisions and developments and started getting into that part of real estate. So I've done, I think, 4 deals now on the development side, ground up stuff. We're still fairly early in the process, but we're working on an apartment building, a retail plaza, a townhome community. There's one property we're working on that's going to be a residential subdivision where we're actually not going to build. We're just going to put in roads and utilities and then sell off the lots to builders. Gotten into all kinds of stuff along the way. On a personal note, I've been married for 31 years to the same beautiful wife, and got 4 kids, all in their 20s. One is in Seattle. I've got one in Portland and another one about to move to Portland, Oregon, and then one in San Francisco. So my kids are all out of the nest and independent. My wife and I are on our own in Austin, and I'm just having a great time in real estate. So that's kind of my backstory.
So, it sounds like it's fantastic. Number one, that you and your wife are independent now. It sounds like that things are going well, and you've 31 years. Congratulations, by the way, Joel. That is fantastic. And so there are a number of different things that you talked about. Kind of one of the things that I really would love the Going Long family to, if you didn't hear it, just the fact that, Joel, you mentioned that you were accidentally got into real estate. We'll definitely come back to that. But along the way, you've mentioned that you have found a number of different areas to continue to take action. You said somewhere in the area of 15 to 17 investments that you made in tangible assets as a passive investor over the last couple of years. You've done 6 or 7 as a general partner or key sponsor. And so I think the fact that you're demonstrating taking action as a very important concept, number one, is great. But also, you mentioned a number of different assets, tangible assets, from biomedical to real estate and development, which is a part of real estate. But one of the things that I already enjoy that you're helping us to understand is there is no one vehicle to help you get to your destination. And so you're practicing that, which is fantastic. But then also too, this is the Going Long podcast, Joel. And, people told me for a really long time, I read all the books, and whether they stated it explicitly or kind of inadvertently, like if you're going to get into real estate, you got to buy the property and you got to be the landlord, and you got to be able to go and check every couple of days and get the $200-$300 a door. And that's what the books say and all that kind of stuff. Well, I think there's some validity to that. I just fundamentally don't believe that that's the only way that you can be a successful investor, which I guess is why that was the genesis of the Going Long podcast. This guy living in Europe, investing exclusively back in the United States. I know I had my reasons, and I know it's completely contrarian to what most of the books will tell you, most of what the theory says. So please share with us, why in the world did you do something so contrarian as live in California and buy your first rental property in Texas? I know you kind of stated it, but still, most people don't do that. So there had to be a bigger why, the fact that you were living in California and bought in Texas?
Yeah, so I kind of touched on that earlier. Was the original reason we made that purchase was my wife and I intended to move to Texas. And so we wanted to basically hedge against the possibility that either Austin real estate would go crazy up or San Jose real estate would go crazy down. And if either of those things happened, we would struggle to afford something that we wanted in the process of making the move. So it was a way for us to, it was almost like an insurance policy to protect against, bad things happening in one or the other market, so that we had at least a floor of, okay, here's the kind of house we can move into. Worst case, we'd move into the house we actually bought. We'd just, terminate the renters, let their lease lapse, and we'd move into that house. But more realistically, what we had in mind was we would sell that house and then, go find something that we actually wanted to live in. But that was the original genesis of the idea, was as a way to protect ourselves. It became so much more than that because, as I said, it helped me understand the benefits of real estate investing. Living in California and in Silicon Valley, in hindsight, there's just been phenomenal appreciation there. And folks who invested in real estate in Silicon Valley have done very well. But at the time, I looked at real estate and said, hey, this doesn't cash flow. If I buy a house for whatever the price was, $500,000, $1 million, and I can rent it out for, let's say, $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, the mortgage and insurance and taxes are just going to completely swamp anything I get out of the rental. And so the only way it's going to make me money is if I count on appreciation. And I didn't trust my ability to predict appreciation. Like I said, in hindsight, I was wrong. Silicon Valley appreciated like crazy. But at the time, I wasn't convinced. And so I said, hey, real estate just doesn't make any money. And I projected that onto other markets. I just said, hey, whatever I'm seeing in Silicon Valley, that must be what real estate is like. So there's no point in looking at other markets. And again, in hindsight, I was just dead wrong. And it took that investment in the Austin property for me to discover how wrong I was.
Yeah. And so when you have that type of an opportunity to, really it's learning, right? At the end of the day. And from a software development perspective, everything is not always right the first time. You kind of got to test things out and you adapt along the way. And fortunately for you and your family, you did that. But just out of curiosity, what was the reason that you selected Texas versus Ohio? And I'm from Ohio. So when you mentioned Ohio earlier, is this why Texas? Why not Ohio?
To be honest, so here's the story. I just wanted to get out of California. I knew that it was a place that was very hostile to business, very high taxes, very high cost of living, really beautiful weather, very pretty place, but just very unpleasant for somebody who wanted to be in business or entrepreneurial. And so my wife and I agreed. I persuaded my wife to move out, and my constraint was, hey, anywhere that doesn't get real winter, I'm fine with. So I drew a line across the map from Arizona to Florida and said, okay, honey, you pick.
I was going to say Ohio definitely is off the map because winter does exist there. I can tell you.
Oh yeah.
I promise.
And I've got some rental properties there, and I know the winters there are brutal.
Yeah. If you're up in Cleveland,
anywhere south of, draw a line halfway across the middle of the country. And, she was also in high tech, and the high tech vibe of Austin appealed to both of us. Yeah. She's Asian, and there's a fair Asian population in Austin that also appealed to us. So, Austin was it was a good place for us to settle after many, many years in Silicon Valley. It had a little bit of a similar vibe. So that's how we picked it.
Yeah. And so, and I guess the reason for that I asked the question and really want the Going Long family to take away from this is you don't always have to have this master plan. Joel is sharing with you that he wanted to be in a place that was more business friendly because he knew that he wanted to scratch that itch again. And he wanted to be somewhere where it was warm. And this happens a lot. And the reason I talk about that is I am a recovering perfectionist. I am someone who used to need to almost wait for all of the stoplights to be red before I left the house. But you can't do that. If you're really trying to move forward, you need to hear from other people like Joel that you don't have to have this massive plan. Just have a couple of different things. Like when I bought my very first rental property, I bought it because at the end of the day, I had family that was nearby and I had money in the bank. There was nothing more to it than that. And then eventually we move forward. So one of the things, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, Joel, appreciate you sharing that story. But you mentioned earlier too, that you had a you wanted to scratch your entrepreneurial itch, and you got into the automotive industry. That's called the automotive industry. And you talked about some of the things. As somebody who went to school, you knew that you wanted to be an employee. You got the great job. You got promotions. You went from, being in development to project management and eventually into program management. And you also decided, hey, I want to scratch this itch. What was that all about?
Yeah. So I think that was a mix of wanting to do something entrepreneurial and wanting to take a little bit better control of my time. So as a W-2 employee, I was working much more than 40 hours a week, really devoting most of my waking hours to my employer. Yeah. At the time, I had 4 small children. My kids were all born in the 90s. And so this was in the early 2000s when my kids were all young. I guess they were between maybe 2 to 8 years in age. And I wanted to spend more time with them. I wanted to have an opportunity to, watch them grow up and connect with them and know them in a way that I really was struggling when I was a W-2 employee working my butt off for some other employer. And so, buying a business that the idea was I can run this business, but I can do it in a way that's hopefully less than 40 hours a week and ideally much less. And therefore take back control of my time and do some other things with it.
Fantastic. And so when you made that test to see that you could own your own business and work a lot less hours, how did that experiment end up for you? Were you working a lot less hours being the owner of the business?
Yeah, so I did succeed in that sense. It was fewer hours that I needed to spend on the business. The challenge was that it didn't make any money. So, it didn't go well from a financial perspective. And so eventually I sold that business and went back into high tech. But as I was going back into high tech, I did it in a job where I knew I had a little bit more flexibility on my time. Also, my kids were older by then. It was probably about 8 or 10 years further along. And so they were all a little bit more independent. It wasn't quite as important that I spend that much time with them. They were teenagers and had their own interests and their own lives. And so it was, as life keeps transitioning, right? Every decade, there's different challenges and different stages of life and of the people that I love that are around me. And so, I adapt as needed to be able to stay connected with them.
No, that's fantastic. So as you make that adaptation and you're staying connected and you're building bonds and building and creating experiences together, that is ultimately what is the most important thing. And I can also say that because after 26 years, I finally just decided it was time for me to do something else as well. And yeah, it's a pretty nice feeling. Trusting that you're enjoying today's conversation. And you know what? If you're tired of getting crushed by taxes and you're looking for greater freedom to be able to choose what you want to do when you want to do it, make sure that you go to firstgencp.com/going-long and see how we can help you today. Let's get back to the conversation. So you end up getting into this real estate thing. You become you decide that this model works. You kind of like it. You bought this property just to have your plan B. You and the wife wanted to move to Texas, but eventually you decided, wow, this is actually kind of making sense. This is going to go from a side hustle to like real life. Talk us through that. What was it that you started recognizing about the asset real estate? And then maybe take us a little bit more about how you started to explore. I mean, you gave us a high level before, but break it down for us a little bit.
Yeah. So to me, real estate, going full time and really pursuing it as a passion and as a vocation, it's all about scaling and leverage. And so, when I was buying things on my own, I was using leverage, but the scaling part was a challenge. And what I mean by that is as I was buying things, I was using bank debt. So I was typically putting maybe 25, 30% down, getting a mortgage to pay for the rest. And so the things I could buy, if I was looking at $100,000 house, I didn't have to come up with $100,000. I only had to come up with 25 or 30,000, and the bank would come up with the rest. And that's great. But that's, doing that one at a time or 2 at a time with duplexes, that there's only so far you can go with that. Each time you buy something, maybe it's $100 a month, $200 a month in cash flow. And eventually, you're going to run out of money. And so I like I said, as I was doing that, I was learning about the syndication model and discovering how people were scaling up in much bigger ways. So in the syndication model, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Maybe not all of your listeners are. That's where a syndicator, a general partner, organizes a group of investors to buy a large-scale commercial asset that no one of them could afford on their own. And so that's what I wanted to do. At first, I was perfectly comfortable doing that as a passive investor. So I was one of the folks who was writing a check to help purchase a commercial asset, let's say an apartment complex with 200 or 300 units. And somebody else was organizing it, finding the deal, putting it under contract, figuring out the business plan, what the renovations would be, what the appreciation play would be, keeping track of the finances, managing the asset, and then eventually making the decision to sell. All of that is what the sponsor does. As a passive investor, I just watch. They report to me, they communicate with me about how it's going, but I'm not in there making any decisions or doing any active work. And so my involvement is really, I just write a check, and then I start cashing checks as the cash flow comes in, and eventually when the asset gets sold, hopefully I get a payoff. So that was a model that looked interesting to me, and it was a way for me to learn about it and discover whether I was interested in becoming a general partner, a sponsor on these deals. And as I did a few of them, it became more and more evident to me that it was something I was capable of doing and might enjoy. One of the early investments I made was with a group of syndicators that I had met at a meetup and gotten to know. And I got them to let me dial into their weekly calls with their property managers. So again, I was passive. They were managing the asset. They were managing the property manager. But I would dial in once a week for half an hour, and I would just go on mute and listen.
Joel, I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm going to cut you off because you're saying something right now that I think a lot of people have. There's some trepidation or fear to actually do what you just did. And I think there's a big learning, because you were mentioning that as you were a limited partner, that you received permission to sit in with the general partners on an investment that you were already a part of. Can you, and like I said, there's a learning here for a lot of people, because this is an opportunity. Like, you did it 15, 16 times, and you recognized that there was a way for you to see if there was something you wanted to do into the future. Can you talk us through how you kind of went about getting that permission to sit in on those calls?
Yeah, well, like I said, I got to know these syndicators. It was a group of 4 syndicators. 3 of them were living in California and running a monthly meetup that I was attending, talking about syndications and commercial real estate. The 4th one was living in Dallas, where they were buying their assets. And so he was their boots on the ground. And the 4 of them were just buying one asset after another and raising money through their network of connections. And so they had a deal come along while I was in the meetups. They talked about the deals with me, and I decided I wanted to invest. But since it was my first investment as a passive, I told them I wanted to learn as much as I can about the asset as well as about the business in the course of making this investment. And so they said, yeah, I feel free to dial in. And I told them, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to interject my opinion. I'm just going to be a fly on the wall and watch what you guys do and learn. And maybe that as I learn, I'll discover, hey, syndication is not really for me. I'll just stay passive forever. So that was kind of my attitude going in, is I want to discover if this is a good fit for me as a passive, as an active, or just not at all. And so it was an investment, but also it was almost like purchasing a seminar where I was putting money into my education very explicitly. And so that was a fantastic learning experience for me. Not only in terms of the actual learning, like, okay, they, once a week they would call their property manager, and I would learn about, as they go through the vacancy report and the maintenance report, and, finding out how they're positioning the property on the market, how they're advertising, how they're dealing with staff turnover, all that stuff. That was an important learning, but also kind of a meta level learning, in the sense that I was discovering, hey, this isn't rocket science. This isn't something that is so far out there that I need to spend years and years studying it, or, takes a skill set that I don't have. This is really, block and tackle running a business. And I think I can do this. In fact, a lot of the skills that I knew as a program manager mapped on really well to what you need to do as an asset manager, in terms of, delegating and setting expectations and tracking, looking at the key metrics and figuring out when you're not meeting those metrics, how to take action, holding people accountable for commitments, that sort of thing. All that stuff it maps on perfectly from a program management career into asset management. And so that was one of the important learnings I got out of those hourly sessions was, hey, I've got the skill sets to do this. I can do this. And so from that, I decided, hey, I want to pursue this as an active, as a sponsor.
Yeah. And so when you went through the work, you did the work, you asked the question, you recognized it. After you saw a number of patterns, you recognize yourself. So there's a high level of self-awareness and awareness of skill set as well, I would say, that I want the Going Long family to take away. And then ultimately, you made the decision that, listen, this is something that you wanted to continue to move forward with. And that is, in my opinion, that's something that is it's a great way to look at it. Now, also, I want the Going Long family to hear that, Joel mentioned that these are people that he had invested not just his capital with. And I don't know, Joel, if it was one of the deals or 5 of the 15 deals. But a lot of it has to do with how well do you know the people? How much capital have you invested with them? And I don't mean just financial capital. I mean time. I mean energy. It's how when I say invested there, because some people may be listening, Joel, and think, hey, listen, I'm going to invest in the very first deal. It's $10K. I do that. And then I want to have access to the entire castle. I'm going to assume that was not the case for you. But if it was the case, please shed some light on that. And what was the Jedi mind trick that you used to be able to do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I've only done one investment with this particular group, but I had gotten to know them through this meetup that I was attending. And so I felt like a good personal connection with them. Yep. Since then, the other investments I've made have been with other syndicators. That was one of the things I wanted to do through the course of my self-education was connect with lots of different syndicators so that I can learn not just how one syndicator manages their business, but how a lot of different syndicators manage their business. So I can pull out best practices and, see what works, what doesn't work, what makes investors happy, what doesn't make investors happy. And from that, I can then figure out how best to manage my business as I'm sponsoring deals.
I think that's fantastic. And so once again, it shows that it's not always just about the check that you're writing. It's also about what is the investment that you're making, i.e. time. You're attending meetups. That's an investment of capital, of time capital, which is something that is, absolutely critical. So speaking of which, so you've learned a lot, the things that you like, the things that you didn't necessarily like. So now you've been on the limited partner side, having very limited responsibility, writing check, picking up checks every whatever the frequency is. And then you're also taking on more of the responsibility for bringing together other people that have similar goals and dreams as it relates to their finances and their lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. Talk to us about what are some of the things that you have seen that could be very helpful for someone who's just getting started like you were from a limited partner perspective and really wants to vet someone who is a general partner. It's all the things that you've gained lots of experience there. And so maybe you could share some of that with us, some of the best practices you've seen or that you would build on that would go beyond just the investment of time at a meetup.
Yeah. So as a passive investor, I mean, the most important thing is that you trust the syndicators you're investing with. You're handing over typically, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 of your money. And there are very few people for which that's a small amount of money. That's a significant investment. And so you really need to trust that the syndicators have high integrity and have good skills that can help bring about the business plan and the results that they're projecting and communicating. So that's the first thing is make sure you trust them. And the way you can develop that trust is to know them personally, or just to know their track record. What have they done? And what skills have they developed? What markets do they understand? What asset classes are they good at? This particular group that I invested with, this first investment we've been talking about, I saw that they had a significant track record. They had bought, at least 6 or 8 other deals in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so this was maybe their 7th or 8th. I don't know exactly what number it was, but they had purchased a number of other assets and had done well with them, had executed their business plan. The typical value add multifamily is, you buy something that's got a problem, whether it's, overdue for renovation or maybe some management issues, maybe it's just a little run down. high delinquency, bad tenants, and you go solve that problem. And by solving that problem, you increase the value of the property. And so this group was exactly their business model. They were finding assets that needed some work. They would do the renovations, they would improve them in some significant way. And by improving them, they'd attract either a better tenant or tenants that were willing to pay more money for their rent, and thereby increase the value of the asset. And so I saw that they had done that many times. I got to know them, got to like and trust them, got to understand, how they approached the business, how they communicated. And these are all things that I encourage my investors to look at as, understand how I'm approaching the business. What assumptions am I making about, how the property, the market, the asset, and how do I communicate as I'm going through the business, executing the business plan. All of these things are essential in being able to trust that the people you're partnering up with can do what they say they're going to do. Because anytime you invest in one of these deals as a passive investor, you're passive, so you're not in control of the asset. But even more importantly, you're not in control of the timeline. Typically these things take years to unfold. 3 years is a quick syndication. 5 to 7 might be more typical, and there are syndications that run well over 7 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's going to depend on the judgment of the syndicators to say, hey, is this a good time to sell? Is this a good time to cash out and pay our investors back? And based on their judgment, they may say, nope, the market's not right for a sale. We're going to keep operating the property. And as a passive investor, you don't get a say in that. Your money just continues to be in that investment. And so, you need to be thinking of the investment in those terms, that you're not in participating in those decisions to say when and whether the asset is sold and you get your money back. And these are all essential things to be aware of when you're making that initial decision to go into the investment.
So that's fantastic. And I love how you were able to break that down for us and really give each listener, each viewer today of the Go Along family, the different things that you can think about as you continue to move forward, some of the different questions that you can ask in a very similar way. This is how you are helping to guide people as they're looking at different opportunities with you, with Lakeline, at Lakeline Properties as well. And so having had that limited partner experience, now having a general partner or key sponsor experience, maybe you could just, before we go into the Going Long Final Three, if you can tell us about what are some of the things that you're doing today at Lakeline Properties, and how are you helping? Who is the person that you are typically helping today?
Yeah, so now I'm into a mix of value add multifamily and ground up development projects, and so I'm doing a little bit of both. One particular project that I'm very excited about is we're getting started on a mixed-use apartment and retail plaza build just east of Austin, about 5 minutes from the Tesla factory. That's where they've just built this gigantic factory. They're in the process of building more. They've moved their international headquarters there, and we've got this property about 5 minutes away, which is great because there's almost no multifamily in the area. So we're getting started to build a 265 unit apartment complex, as well as a 40,000 square foot retail plaza. We're raising money for that now. It's a 506C, which means I'm allowed to talk about it to folks that I don't know. That's an important thing that syndicators need to be aware of, is staying compliant with SEC regulations about where and how they talk about their deals. But in this case, I can talk about it in public. But that's a project we're very excited about because, with Tesla bringing all these employees in, with supporting businesses about to come to the area, to support Tesla. There's a couple of very big movie studios that are on the drawing board about 15 miles east of us towards a town called Bastrop. So there's just a ton of demand coming to the area. So we're really excited about this project. We're very confident that there's going to be demand and that we'll be able to fill it up when we rent it out. So that's one of the projects I'm working on. But I'm doing other, like I said, value add multifamily and other development deals.
Okay, well, fantastic. So it's great to hear about that, and also one of the things you want to look for is is the net migration. Are there more people moving to an area versus leaving in the area, and are those people looking for a place to stay? And typically that response is yes. So, and I know you'll get a chance to find out more about some of the things that Joel is doing later on. But here's the thing, Joel, we kind of got to get to the going long final three. And the thing is, I never ask any of our guests, and today you're our special guest, the going long final three, unless you tell me that you're ready. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I figured you'd be ready. I had a sneaky suspicion that was going to be the response. So here we go. So we started with you over in Austin, Texas. I'd like to bring it back to this side of the pond now. This is kind of my adopted home side of the pond now, over here in Europe. So can you help me and the entire Going Long family understand, what is your favorite European city that you've either visited or is still on your bucket list to visit?
Yeah. So for that one, I hope you'll forgive me. I'm going to push the boundaries of your question just a little bit. About 5 years ago, I took my extended family, to Israel and had just an amazing, phenomenal time. We went all over Israel over a period of about a week and a half. Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Golan Heights. The cultural history and just the accumulated culture and knowledge that's in that place is just astonishing. We had a chance to visit an archaeological dig, and we actually helped the archaeologists, go through some of the rubble to find artifacts from at least, I think, 2,500 years ago. Just an incredible experience. So I highly recommend that to anybody who's looking at traveling.
Fantastic. And so you're allowed to push the boundaries, but you have to make a selection. What would be your favorite city?
Individual city, probably Tel Aviv. That's
all right. That's fair enough. Fair enough.
That's got a very high energy place.
All right. Awesome. So Tel Aviv it is. And so that's for question number one. Question number two actually has a lot to do with things that I have learned from very successful people, Joel. And I would consider you to be someone who's very successful. You've had a successful corporate career. You, as a business owner, you've learned, you've reinvented yourself, and you are now adding lots of value to others. And so one of the things, hopefully you will agree, Joel, is very much when I haven't had a chance to learn and see other very successful people, one of the things that they do very, very differently is typically very successful people, from the very first time that they put their mind to something and they have a plan and they go out and they execute the plan, they execute that plan perfectly, which is what allows them to actually get to result. Oh my gosh, I think this is... No, I'm just kidding. It's a joke. It's just a joke. I know there's a lot of noise in the background, but it's just a joke. Of course, nobody gets these things right. Really successful people typically don't get things right the first time or even the second time. Usually, really successful people make 20 to 50 times more mistakes than anybody else. Hopefully, you can agree with that. So that was just kind of a joke. But this part is no joke, Joel. Every single time that I have found someone who's very successful, every single time they make a relevant mistake or learning opportunity, or call it whatever you want to call it. Whenever something doesn't go the way that's supposed to and it's a relevant mistake, they stop every single time. They learn from that mistake, and then they put different strategies, tactics, and actions in place to minimize the probability of that exact same thing happening again. So I don't necessarily want you to think about the mistake or the learning opportunity, or however you want to call it, but what is the one lesson that you learned as a result of going through that situation? And what is that one lesson that you know that the Going Long family needs to know today? Share that one lesson with us, please.
Ooh, that's a good question. So I guess I would say the fundamental lesson for me is decide how you want to approach the business if you want to be in the business. There's different levels of activity versus passivity. And so really you need to decide, okay, how involved do you want to be? If real estate to you is something that you'd like to participate in passively, and you want other people to do the work, and you've got other things you want to do with your time, whether that's a W-2 job or spending time with kids or grandkids or traveling the world, that's kind of the first fundamental decision you've got to make is what's your level of participation in the business. And from there, you can then decide on a strategy that can make that work.
Fantastic. Absolutely love that. So how active or how passive do you really want to be? And then from there, make the decisions that continue to help you move forward. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Joel. And this brings us to question number 3. It's about helping to feed our minds with knowledge. What is the one book that you would recommend to the Going Long family today?
Yeah. So there's a book that I really love from a guy named Brian Burke. It's called The Hands-Off Investor. And Brian Burke is a very active syndicator. He's done a lot of deals. And the book that he wrote is intended to help the passive investor. So folks who are thinking about getting into syndications as a passive investor, this is a phenomenal resource to help educate you on what to look for in a deal, how to analyze a deal, how to analyze a syndicator. So if you want to educate yourself on some of the mechanics of the business, but you want to do it in a way that makes sense as a passive investor, this is a phenomenal asset. I love it when I hear my investors have read this book, because then I know that they're going to come in with knowledgeable information and great questions, and not just kind of basics of, hey, what's an apartment complex? How do I get into this? But more, okay, I see how you've underwritten this deal. Tell me about the assumptions you're making, and why do you think those are valid? And it's a great way to sort of give yourself a springboard into knowledge. So Hands-Off Investor by Brian Burke.
All right, absolutely fantastic. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, the Hands-Off Investor, Brian Burke, and we'll make sure that we include that in the show notes. So don't worry, don't freak out if you're running on the treadmill or something like that. You'll just have to click a link. It'll be super easy. Joel, I cannot believe it. I'm thinking about this guy from California who's talking to his wife, figuring like, hey, listen, do we stay here? Do we do something else? And you decide that you want to get ready, start to prepare your plan B. You buy a property in Texas. You realize that either you can have someone that's there that's renting from you. Potentially, if you want to make the move quickly, they'll move out. And then from there, you continue to build your career in the IT industry. But then you decided, you know what? You needed to do this entrepreneur itch. You wanted to scratch it. You scratched the itch. You realized like, hey, listen, you were working less hours, but it wasn't necessarily the most profitable venture. And so, hey, you know what? You decided you liked IT enough to go back to IT. And then from there, well, things really started happening. You started recognizing that this asset that you were having, this could be something more than just your plan B. So then you decided that you wanted to understand how you could scale this. So you started investing with other people. You started learning about things like syndications that not only allowed you to invest your capital in hard assets, ones that were providing you with, you write the check one way, and then it would provide you multiple checks coming back your way. You also took the initiative to say, hey, listen, I want to find out if this is the right step for me. And so you got even more involved. You started investing your most important capital, which is your time, to develop relationships, and also placed your financial capital and decided, hey, listen, let me even get in on a call. Listen, because you built that rapport, you built the relationship, it was a thing that you were able to do. And so you've gone from that, taking a lot of theoretical knowledge, making it practical application and true experience. And now you are also helping others and doing that through Lakeline Properties. And, I know so many people in the Going Long family are thinking to themselves, yeah, Billy, just ask him the question, man. Just ask the question. And so I'm going to ask the question. What is the best way for the Going Long family to find out more about what you're doing, Joel, and also more about what's happening at Lakeline Properties?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, sure. People can go to my website, lakelineproperties.com. I've got a few resources there, including a list of books that I really like. The Hands-Off Investor is on that list, but there's lots of other books for folks who want to get into investing or want to learn about commercial real estate. And also on that website, there's a form they can fill out to connect with me, or they can just send me an email directly, joel@lakelineproperties.com. And I'm happy to engage in a conversation and, help to, I always like to get to know more people who are interested in commercial real estate.
Fantastic. So joel@lakelineproperties.com. We'll also include the website. We're going to make it super easy for everybody. Like I said, don't worry. All you'll have to do is click and get in touch with Joel right away. You can talk about life. You can talk about moving California to Texas. You can talk about what it was like to travel to Israel with this family. And you can also talk about commercial real estate. So listen, we're going to make it really easy for everybody. Joel, on behalf of the entire Going Long family, I want to thank you very much for deciding to invest your time with me and with us today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Awesome. Joel, if you give me like 10 seconds, I just want to wrap things up with the Going Long family, because you made it super easy for everybody. You gave us not just the high level strategy stuff. You gave us tactical actions, things that you can do, investing your time, questions you can ask. And I know that everybody is going to be working on these questions, and they're going to do that because you're going to be downloading today's episode once again, and you're going to share the episode, share with other people, talk about the things that Joel shared with you today so that you can become an even more informed investor, gain more experience, and have things to talk about. And also take Joel up on his offer. He said, give him a call, send him an email, and things like that. And so while you're doing these things, I'll be here preparing for the next conversation and also to welcome you back for the very next episode. So until then, go out and make it a great day. And thank you very much. Trust that you enjoyed today's conversation. And once again, today's conversation was sponsored by First Generation Capital Partners. If you're an accredited investor and want to find out more about how we're helping accredited investors to gain their personal freedom even faster, go to firstgencp.com/going long.